Isn't this wonderful? Thank you. I feel like I'm in my element when I get to come back to the men's work, and especially on this weekend. I knew what I had to start with. On this night, November 7th, 44 years ago, was when really my interest in and commitment to men began. The very days were here, 6th, 7th, 8th. I was giving my first boys' retreat. They were all 18-year-olds in Cincinnati, Ohio. They were required to make a retreat to graduate from a Catholic high school. And I had just been put in charge of the retreat program for the Archdiocese. It was called TEC, Teens Encounter Christ. I don't know if any of you remember that. They later accused me of destroying the program because it wasn't my intention, but what happened on this night, almost this very time, these jocks, and they were about 25, 18-year-old jocks, all into football, basically, and I was supposed to convert them. Well, they endured me for the Friday and all day Saturday, sat there and paid no attention, really. And then on the Saturday night, November 7th, 1971, they were sitting on the floor, and I was standing in front of them in this old Franciscan chapel, and I gave a sermon to them on, wouldn't you guess, the prodigal son. And that night changed everything. Now, some of you have heard this story, but I had to tell it because it was today. Today's the anniversary. That night changed my life, and in many ways it changed theirs. I did not in any way consider myself charismatic or Pentecostal. I'd just come out of a marvelous Vatican II progressive Franciscan education. And yet, as I ended that story of the father running down the road toward the son, these boys began, I'm not exaggerating, singing in tongues. All right? It's never happened since. Only the first one. And these jocks who would never touch one another for fear of looking feminine or something, all began to put their arms around one another. And basically they stayed in that chapel that entire night. After, I was a bit embarrassed by all of this emotion and this sound that I didn't know what to make of. So I'm sitting to the side. You'd think a preacher would be excited that someone responded to their sermon. And finally I break in and I say, boys, I'm going to go over and put the pizzas in the oven. And I'll be back about half an hour, and we can go over and have pizza, and even we can have one beer, And they didn't even pay a bit of attention to me. So I walked out, and I put the pizzas in the oven, waited a half an hour. I thought they'd be coming. They didn't come. The pizzas were getting cold. So I go back in and open the back doors of this little chapel, and there they all are, kneeling around the high altar of this church, singing in tongues. Well, that just moved my whole theology and spirituality to a whole new level. And the heart of it was this, that after that night and for the rest of my life, and I hope you come to this experience, I knew that I was not the doer. I'm going to repeat it. I knew that I was not the doer. It's done to you. And all you can do is undergo God. All you can do is allow it. All you can do is get out of the way. Now, in all the subsequent retreats I gave between 71 and 96, when we started the first Rites of Passage at Ghost Ranch, I never saw such almost expectation of what I would now call transformation or conversion after that first retreat until the men's Rites of Passage. where again and again I saw men say, I'll never be the same, right? I get it. So it was done unto me, just as it is done unto you. And that's why you can't, the giveaway that you get it, that you've been undergone, is that it's not all about you. That's why I made that one of the 5 promises. You are about this mystery, and you are merely an instrument. You are being used, and all you have to do is allow yourself to be used and trust that God would use you. This is going to sound like I'm doing my usual double talk, but the way I'd say it now is I find my significance precisely in being insignificant. That insignificant human beings like me and you could be the love object of God. That just answers the whole question of significance, and changes your politics, your economics, your worldview, your seeking for power, importance. It's the utter death of the ego, because you are loved for nothing, nothing. I did nothing to earn this whatever has happened to me, and I know that more than you do. I know some of you probably think I'm smart, or some of you think I'm holy, or I don't know what you think, but it really and true, I'm just one of you. But it did begin on this night, and I woke up on the morning of November 8th, and there were little windows from where my room I could look down into the chapel, and oh darn it, these boys were now sleeping on the carpeted area around the high altar of the church. Well, you just don't do that in a Catholic church. An old father, what was his name, was coming in for the early mass, and he's stepping over these sleeping bodies of boys. And he goes ahead and just goes through the mass, like so many priests do, just on cruise control. And they wake up, they're waking up. I'm down there by then, and they come to attention, and they're all interested in mass. Well, where did this come from? I mean, just the day before they weren't, they weren't interested in anything spiritual. So I know the charismatics, if you have a Pentecostal or Assembly of God background, they call that the baptism in the Spirit. I can't deny that it's real. I saw it again and again. But I also knew that I couldn't program it. I can't make that happen. It happens when it happens, like the first Pentecost did. But we all know that Jesus did say there's 2 baptisms, the baptism of water, which is largely the baptism of John the Baptist. I think the vast amount of Christianity is the religion of John the Baptist. It's not the religion of Jesus. Right? That doesn't mean they're bad people or God doesn't love them, but it's largely ritual and requirements. But Jesus says, I've come to baptize you in fire and the Spirit. He clearly says there's a different thing. Now, I think when we constructed, Stephen Gamble is here with me, who helped me put together the original Rites. We were hoping to create something that could, insofar as possible, create the circumstances, create the environment whereby the ego could be out of the way for once, and this baptism of fire and the Spirit could happen. But even then, I mean, one of you asked me coming down here, how many men have made it? Would we be in the area of 8,000 now, 9,000 worldwide? Does anybody know the number? I don't know. Doesn't matter. 8, 9, something like that. Doesn't matter. Even the vast majority of men, many of whom I remember, hugging them goodbye up at Ghost Ranch, and they'd say, I'll never be the same, and you never heard of them again, So even you can have the baptism of fire and the Spirit, but if there isn't some kind of community, ongoing accountability, something like the 12-step meetings, by the way, to assure that you're going to hang on to this. Within a few weeks, it's just an emotional memory. It doesn't transform your consciousness. And I just want to thank you that you'd come to an event like this, are the men who I believe are still in the middle of that transformation of consciousness that is really the rest of your life. As little by little you change. No, you are changed. You don't change anything. You are changed. As all that junk and wonder that you pressed into the unconscious that we call today the shadow, as it finally shows itself. And that's the material that wakes you up. That's the material that keeps you growing. But what we found is it's very hard to heal individuals in an unhealed culture. And Americans have got to admit this. We live in an unbelievably superficial culture. If the present political debates don't prove that to you, I don't know what it's going to take. That anybody could take this seriously, and that there's even that percentage of people who would think this is presidential material, all right, is frightening for the future of our democracy, We can't make fun of the Germans anymore, all right, because we could be led anywhere very easily. That's what happens when people have not done their soul work. When there is no inner awakening, they're simply highly usable by any appeal to ego, power, money, importance, all the other things that our country is in awe of. The more I've tried in my life to understand the gospel and preach on the gospel, it is an assault on almost every mainline belief system that America has. Really, every one of them. And if you're not prepared to see that issue after issue after issue, you sit there and you say, I don't agree with either side. Fee on both of your houses. It has nothing to do with what we call third eye seeing or wisdom seeing. And I know there's a lot of concern that we haven't grown as big as the Promise Keepers or even as the Mankind Project, and I don't think we ever will, because our spirituality is much more, even though I started with first half of life 18-year-old boys, even what I've heard all day here today and last night is clearly second half of life spirituality. And most people aren't ready for that or aren't even interested in that, it seems to me. Especially with this recent health incident that I went through. But just knowing my age, and we have a really strong staff at the CAC right now. Michael, our director, is sorry he can't be here, but he's elk hunting with his dad and brothers. This is a yearly event they do. They keep pressing me. They gave me recently a 46-page strategic plan, what they're going to do when I die, And they so humbly showed it to me, and I said, is this okay, Richard? Is this in line with your thinking or your hope? And they keep trying to get me to make it more concise. What's the heart of it? What is it what's the sine qua non that we have to hold on to after you're gone, that is the essential message? And, I first whittled it down to the 7 great themes of the Living School. We have a few who are students in the Living School. And that's helped a lot. It's focused it. But just last week, I thought I'd try again. And I got the 7 down to 3. And I'm going to give you the 3. And they actually don't sound anything like the 7, so I don't know what the core is. But the first one is just building on what I just told you. I believe actually my first essential core teaching is that and I know this word has been overused, misused, you're probably sick of it, but there has to be foundational conversion from the ego. That's point one. Or anything about Bible, church, sacraments, ministry is prostituted. If the ego is still in charge, you can be ordained 3 times and it ain't going to make a bit of difference. And you're not going to make a bit of difference in anybody's life. You're going to abuse the Bible. You're going to abuse the sacraments because it's all self-referential. How can I get myself to feel better about myself as a beloved of God? And because most of us, I think it's fair in saying, most of us began with a rather negative and limited theology, where basically, and I don't think this is exaggerating, God was a terrorist. God was not anybody you naturally liked, trusted, wanted to be with, or whose company you enjoyed, or much less did God enjoy your company. So that's why when we have in the prodigal son story, this daddy running down the road, embracing the son, if this is Jesus' image of God, this sure isn't the same image of God the church gave me. Not at all. And what even saddens me, especially in a lot of my evangelical friends, is there's actually an affection for this belief in hell. I mean, they feverishly defend it. Like I wouldn't know how to live without it. Why in God's name would anyone want to defend a notion of God as a punitive, eternal torturer? You never see Jesus punish a single person in his ministry. Never. And yet we ended up creating a God who was not just a punisher, but an eternal punisher. Now that's why churches are just, there's not many men in sight. Because what I found out in the weeks subsequent to that wonderful retreat in November of 71 is that almost all of those 25 boys had a wounded, let's leave it at that, a wounded relationship with their daddy. And that's what started all the men's work, not just with us, but Promise Keepers the same way, Mankind Project the same way. And I think the father wound. The inability, it doesn't always have to be active alcoholism or abuse, but simply an inability to pass on attention and affection and intimacy. A lot of times not even to the wife, much less to the children, because the capacity is not there to know how to be tender, affectionate, caring. It just isn't one of the gifts of the male of the species. And this isn't true just of our country, but as I traveled, it seems to me much of the world. And with this massive, massive wound, until we, first of all, redeem some kind of notion of God from the toxic notion that most of us have, if not consciously, almost certainly unconsciously, that you actually do not like God, do not trust God. The less you have to do with God, the better, the safer you are. Be honest. Because he's never on your side. And, of course, he's a he to begin with. And if you have a father wound, that gets you off to a bad start. We Catholics tried to solve that by putting Mary everywhere. We thought it would undo it. And it sometimes worked, but in many cases it didn't. So my 3 points is that the first of my 3 points is it all depends upon foundational conversion that moves you from your radical self-centeredness to a larger significance that ironically allows you to be insignificant. I know I'm double talking, but I'm not, because the question of significance is answered. Does that make sense? Radical significance. And when you draw close to that every day, which is the meaning of divine intimacy, you don't need to climb the ladders of prestige, power, and possessions and all the things that are, the entire engine of the United States of America. And that's all we got. That's all we got. I consume, therefore I am. I produce, therefore I am. That is the American creed. That is what we imbibed with our mother's milk. And we live so inside of it that we don't see it. Huh? And if I hadn't been given the gift to travel to so many poor countries and to see people who didn't have that creed, I consume, therefore I am. I produce, therefore I am. I don't think I would have myself had the courage to believe that there is such a thing as foundational conversion, because we're all inside of it. You can't see it. Now that's why we've got to have, and you've replicated it here these days, some kind of, I know we call it church. The 12-steppers call it meetings, all right? Let me just call it an accountability system for somebody to keep your feet to the fire, because we men have an immense capacity to be dishonest with ourselves, saying we believe things when it's obvious in our behavior we do not. And I think the men who did not commit themselves to another group of men, whatever the effects were of their rites of passage, were, even though they'll write me sometimes years later and say it changed their life, but there's no evidence it did, because they were right back, into where they were before. Power, success, money, war, whatever we can do to protect ourselves and secure ourselves. So there must be some actual experience of a larger mystery that resituates my small self in its correct context. Now, that self is able to be so much more peaceful. It doesn't need to keep proving itself or asserting itself. Now, I believe that's what a baptism in the Spirit experience is. Now, that led me to tools like the Enneagram, which a lot of you know, to the working with 12-step spirituality, the breathing underwater material, and the men's rites of passage. As how can we get people to this foundational recognition of how they are situated in this larger world, and to dive into it with freedom and grace. Then the teaching on contemplation of solitude and silence, shadow work, the true self, false self material that we finally dealt with in Immortal Diamond, all the theology of suffering. Those are all attempts to say that the way you have been told isn't true. That what you think is true isn't true. It's not true. You're basing your life on an illusion. You're basing your life on something that's going to get very thin when you get my age. And when you have to face your death very shortly, you're going to say, what did I waste 30 years on, It doesn't mean anything, except appealing to the ego. What I'm going to give you is an image, almost a simple geometric image, which to some of you will feel even infantile. But I'm going to use it to develop this point. I want you to picture 3 boxes. The first box we're going to call order. The second box we're going to call disorder. The third box we're going to call reorder. Got it? Picture them in front of your eye. Now, what I try to say in Falling Upward is that the people who grow up the easiest and the best are frankly those who grow up in the first box. That's probably truer of my generation, the older among you. We grew up with probably an excess of order. There was a rule for everything. There was a law for everything. There was a protocol for everything. There you knew when you were right, when you were wrong, when you were in, when you were out. It really serves the first half of life very well. But it's only the first half of life. Now, most people who call themselves conservative politics or conservative theology, what they try to do is just keep rebuilding the first box. Whatever their first explanation of order was, what Thomas Merton called your private salvation project, all right? What made you wonderful? What made you special? And it was you were male and you were American and you were from Texas and you were heterosexual and you had a good job and you married the beauty queen from the high school. That's your salvation project. And it's all so well constructed. And it works as long as you never go to box 2. So you just got to keep hardening the frame around box 1. Order, 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 order at all costs. I was reading in the newspaper today what the poor Mormons are going through, trying to reassert heterosexuality at all costs, excommunicating even the children of gay parents. It's like, oh my God, we're going to maintain order. It is a heterosexual universe, and the fact that it isn't true with maybe 8% of the universe, we don't care. We're going to have the order we want. Do you see? That's a strong temptation. And it's what I talk about when I talk about the loyal soldier. When your first salvation project is taken from you, there will be huge ego resistance. What the ego hates more than anything else is to change. But if you're blessed, and we are the religion of the wounded one, you will allow yourself to be wounded. Your world of perfect explanation and perfect order will be found not to be true on some level. Maybe your first marriage will fall apart. Maybe your job will be lost. Maybe one of your children will tragically die. Or maybe it's just that huge morass of meaninglessness that hits so many people in the middle of life. But you're drug kicking and screaming into the second box. Now, Paul would call this the folly of the cross, the essentially tragic nature of human existence. So it's much easier for rich people to stay in the first box because they can keep protecting themselves from the tragedy, seemingly. They can't really, but they think they can. Whereas the poor are subject to the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. They have to let life take them where it's going to take them. Now, people who were formed after 1968, which you've heard me say before is the birth of postmodernism, where we denied all universal meanings and all meta-narratives, as they would say, they were born in box 2. If you're an academic or a liberal or a progressive, you sort of dove into box 2. You love to be cynical about almost everything. You love to dismiss. Your primary demon is the demon of dismissal, That's phony, that's stupid, don't believe in that, don't believe in that. For those of you who were here last year, it's what I call the mean greens, if you know spiral dynamics, you remember spiral dynamics. Highly sophisticated, but very arrogant and very individualistic. Please forgive me, George, but we identify it with Boston for some reason. These highly educated people who really are so politically correct, but they drive you crazy, It's just, go away, because there's no love in it. It's not love, it's just arrogant headiness, about what is the latest political correctness. So if conservatives keep trying to rebuild box 1, sophisticated liberals, academics, atheists, agnostics, a lot of Vatican II Catholics, frankly, just lived perpetually in box 2. It can give you a kind of moral superiority to dismiss all those foolish people, who aren't as enlightened as you are. It's a temptation, and it's a temptation to our kind of group. Because, I'm sorry to say, our work has made you sort of sophisticated, And that's why we keep giving you this principle from Ken Wilber of transcend and include. And if you can't include, you have not transcended. And Ken Wilber goes on to say that only healthy religion, he says only, this isn't me, he's not a clergyman, Because the only healthy religion is fully prepared to lead you through all of the 9 levels of consciousness, from the tribal, early stage, evangelical, Mississippi believer, to the enlightened mystic who can love his enemies or her enemies. Nothing else can do that. Education can't do that. Harvard can't do that for you. It can't. It'll usually trap you at the orange level or at best the green level. So you're saying, well, what's this third box? This is what we mean by enlightenment. This is what we mean by transformation. This is what we mean by the risen Christ, really. This one who can be intimate with everything, who could be transparent to doors and to spaces, and not protect himself from them. So here's the thing. There is no non-stop flight from box 1 to box 3. Got it? Don't even try. All right? Don't even try. Now, you're all going to. I did too. I can just get enlightened without going through the cross. Absurdity, disorder, my game falling apart. That's what you were signed with on the first morning of initiation. You're signed with the cross that some part of your life will fall apart and must be allowed to do so. And not only allowed to, but surprise of surprises, it will be the very thing that will open up the divine gates. So, I mean, no other religion says this, including most of Christianity. Most of Christianity is still a winner's script, right? And what Jesus came to give is something that if you're dedicated to total winning, you're never going to join the Jesus team. You know, when people used to talk about, or at least to me, people talked about that you have to go through some necessary betrayals in your life. I think that's largely true. And I thought they were always talking about, well, Judas and Peter both betrayed Jesus. When those people come into my life, I've got to allow that to happen and find God in it. But I think it's even more subtle than that. When the apostles recognized that their upwardly mobile scheme that they were buying into was not true, that he wasn't giving them a winner's script, he was giving them a loser's script, I think they felt deeply betrayed by Jesus. And that's why you don't hear from them for a while. You know? We're not sure we want to buy into this new team. And I suspect that happened to an awful lot of our men after their rites of passage. You mean this isn't a scheme so I can feel saved and superior and white and upper middle class and Catholic or whatever you want to feel? But in fact, it's the devastating of that whole game. Doesn't mean anything. So that gets me to point 2 of my 3 elements of my teaching. I think when there is foundational conversion, the infallible sign, and this might shock or surprise some of you, but for me, the infallible sign that one has undergone this radical transformation of consciousness is there will be, on one level after the other, a realignment with powerlessness instead of power. And if you don't see that, you can talk about Jesus all you want. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. If you are still playing the power games under all their forms of wanting to feel superior and saved and separate and better than your neighbor and dismissing the least of the brothers and sisters on any level, I don't think you got the Jesus agenda and allow that crisis of betrayal. It's like Jeremiah said to Yahweh, you raped me, Lord, and I let myself be raped. I didn't know this is what I was buying into. And maybe some of you didn't know what you were buying into. How could you? I didn't either. No one would join if you knew it. So at the beginning, we got to make it sort of appealing. I remember the first booklet the Franciscans sent me in Kansas from Cincinnati to get me to come to the seminary. And it was a smiling, handsome little seminarian on the front. And the first page was the swimming pool in the seminary, and the second page was the gym and outings. And, well, you know, who wouldn't buy into that? They laid out a red carpet for following St. Francis. Wasn't that interesting? It's the only way you can appeal to the first half of life. That's why Pope Francis is calling careerism the leprosy of the church. The leprosy destroys everything. When ministers don't eventually recognize, I didn't become a minister to serve people. I became a minister so the people could serve me. Isn't that obvious at this point? Isn't that pretty obvious? And that's why the whole thing is falling apart, that it all became this climbing winner's script, not just by the clergy. I don't want to waste too much time picking on them. They deserve it, but we all deserve it. All of us. We didn't know the path that we were being led on. So what you should be able to see in a converted person's life, certainly emerging in the first 5 years, is some kind of desire for service, some kind of new concern for justice and social justice, some kind of concern for somebody beyond myself. If you don't see that, why should I believe you've been transformed into Christ? Why? Come on. Come on. It's just garbage. It's just vocabulary. Now, this is what your children and your grandchildren are leaving. They just don't bother with it, as you know. What impresses me with so many of the young people is they're bypassing all the belief systems that we argued about so much, and they just go right to honest community and honest service. And I bet I'm talking about some of your kids. I see it in your nodding heads. I just want to do it. Do it on Sunday morning instead of singing about it one more time. Does Jesus really need us to sing to him every Sunday morning? Is there any indication? The whole paradigm of Western Christianity is falling apart. And this is true statistically, because the model for training us to lead these communities was largely an academic model. And, it worked in some cases. Look how well Jim spoke today and Joel spoke yesterday. They got those good educations, and I'm speaking now. But too often the education became the substitute for transformation, you see? And again, it serves in that way. So it seems to me that there is no clear evidence that I live no longer, not I, but Christ lives in me. And that your false self has been, or is gradually being replaced by your true self. Unless there's a change in your politics, your economics, your view toward immigrants, race relations, and I warn you, you won't fit into most American conversations. And that's true in great part on the liberal side as much as the conservative side. Because you can't just roll over and say everything the liberals are saying is gospel either, can you? It's like Jesus said, I have no place to lay my head. Huh? That's where you've been led. No place to lay your head. Huh? So I think it is a sense of betrayal by Jesus himself. Where did you lead me? Hmm? And do I want to buy into this? Do I really want this transformed life? Or do I just want to feel safe and superior? Then my third point, which probably is obvious, but what became clarified for me is that it did have to be the third point, not the first. That I believe some development of a contemplative mind is the only way to maintain the fruits of number one and number two. You can have a foundational conversion like a lot of our men did on their rites of passage, but they developed no inner practice, and within 6 months they were thinking like Uncle Joe thinks again. There was no ability to think non-dually, to think in terms of what we call third force or third way. That is years of rewiring. So step one, foundational conversion. Step two, moving from this idealization of power, which isn't power anyway, by the way. And for those of you in 12-step programs, this is step number 1, all right? The realignment with powerlessness. That this is how you keep breaking through. It's called vulnerability. It's called honesty. It's called humility. It's called connectivity. People at that level, they just won't stop growing. They just won't stop changing. But unless you develop some contemplative practice, the first two will not go deeper and they will not last. So that's my way of describing how you get in the third box. But the way God leads you there is, frankly, through the disillusionment, the betrayal, the loss of meaning that the second box offers every one of our lives. But of course, the good news there is you're indestructible. Once you've incorporated losing into the nature of winning, you can't fail anymore. Do you understand? It looks like a loser's script, but it's actually a winner's script because you're indestructible. And that's why we worship a wounded man, if you're Christian, which is a really strange image for God when you think of it. A bleeding, naked man with his arms nailed open. The most unlikely, unbelievable metaphor for the shape of God I can imagine. What is this God inviting us into? And it is very different than I think almost all of mainline Christianity bargained for. This isn't what we wanted. Now, without that Pentecost experience, I don't think the apostles bought into it either. So, brothers, whatever our work is, all we can do is keep ourselves, by God's grace, out of the way. The 5 unquestioned premises that most Christians operate with, that I believe, forgive my arrogance, I believe are totally untrue. Premise number 1, that the Christian way is a list of moral requirements for membership, for worthiness, for salvation. That the Christian way is a list of moral requirements. You know, I saw the poor bishops and cardinals wasting 3 weeks in Rome arguing about whether married people could go to communion. I disagree with the very premise. It's a waste of time to be... Who is it that you're opening and closing the gates of heaven for people by whether they've fulfilled some moral requirements? The genius of Jesus, to repeat it one more time, is Jesus uses the falling to bring you to himself, if I can use the masculine word for God. It's not a list of requirements. The assurance is that you cannot live up to the requirements. Paul says that very clearly in Romans and Galatians. The law was given to let you know that you cannot obey the law. You cannot. If any of you have obeyed the law, I want you to raise your hand, please. Who are you? There's no such human being. There's no such human being. It is given to make you aware of your powerlessness, your weakness, your incapacity to love. You're in every day. Don't you see it every day? I still don't know how to love. I still don't know how to love. I still don't know how to love. It never stops because love is infinite, of course. Second premise that I disagree with, that the gospel is best framed in a win-lose scenario. I was reading a book recently by Alan Jones. He quoted John Osborne's book, A Better Class of Person. And this John here in this book is describing his mother. He says it was consistent with her view of affection or friendship, that all affection and all friendship was merely a system of rewards, blackmail, calculation, and self-aggrandizement, in which everybody only comes off best or worst. Now, I want you to take that very same sentence, and I'd say the same about religion. I think our view of religion is seen as a system of rewards, blackmail, calculation, and self-aggrandizement. Has little to do with the love of God. Has little to do with transformation. How can I manipulate this God who apparently is manipulatable by fulfilling some requirements or whatever else it might be? Remember when I was still in Cincinnati on a weekday morning, I talked to a Catholic men's breakfast society, very successful Catholic businessmen, all in their three-piece suits, or suits anyway. And I said, what if the gospel is actually a win-win scenario? Now, these are highly competitive Catholic businessmen, all successful. And I thought I made my case rather well. This was 30 years ago. Still trying to make it. And at the break, this man comes up to the podium and drums his fingers. Father, Father, he says, in a most patronizing way, Father, Father, come on. He said, and this is a quote. He said, win, that isn't even interesting. It isn't. To most males, the win-win scenario is not interesting. You've got to frame reality in terms of the Mets versus the Royals. Do you understand? Then I'm in. There's got to be a game. There's got to be someone to beat up. There's got to be someone who you're better than. And is it any accident the gospel has been preached by men for 2,000 years? And the whole thing was framed, win-lose, win-lose. And to assure you that you were on the side of the winners, we gave you a bunch of requirements that would apparently earn God's love and win you eternal salvation. Let's just be honest mathematically. If those rules are true, we can easily say 99.5, probably more, % of the human beings God has ever created since the beginning of time are damned to hell, right? This is a sad universe. God is not any kind of victor. God is not any kind of lover. God is not very great at all. When I see the evangelicals singing on and on, God is great, God is great, I said, let me talk to you about your God. He's usually not very great at all. There's no room for black people. There's no room for gay people. There's no room for poor people. This isn't a great God at all. Until the premises of this whole thing are undercut and underdone, which by the true preaching of the gospel, we can't enter into the world of abundance, into the world of grace. That wouldn't even be interesting. Win-win. Third premise. I guess I already dove into it. I'm sorry. That the God revealed in the scriptures is punitive. I know all those Old Testament passages about Yahweh just, seeming to want to kill all the Canaanites and the Jebusites and the Perizzites and everybody who wasn't Jewish. But after a while you say, I think this is blue level consciousness, all right? That's why the spiral dynamics thing is so helpful, that you recognize, okay, it does start there. The Bible does start at the lower levels, the blue level, the red level, moves into the blue level where most of us were born. Then it moved into the orange level, the rational, critical level. Now the sophisticated people from Boston are green level, But then we find that that's even a trap, and we got to move to the mystical level to understand and include all of the others and not to need to hate any of them, because we all walk through all of them. And God is able to love all of them, so I guess we can too. But as long as God is described in terms of retributive justice, I bet that's the only notion most of you had of justice till, when did the word restorative justice start? 20 years ago, 25 years ago? Yeah. The word didn't even exist. And that's the biblical notion of justice, that the way God punished Israel, I can give you chapter and verse in Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Hosea. The way God punishes Israel, be prepared, he loves them even more. Now, I'm going to love you into loving me back. It's precisely the prodigal son story. That's what Jesus centers in on. But we didn't have in Western civilization any notion of restorative justice. The way justice was done was quid pro quo. And we old-time Catholics, we even grew up, you masturbated this many times, this many years in purgatory. You know, it was all weighed out. Some of you are going to spend a long time there, I'm afraid. It was all weighed and counted, all right? As you know, Therese the Little Flower is one of my favorite saints, and one commentary on Therese says, what she did is she took all mathematics out of the understanding of the gospel. Stop counting. Stop counting, or you can't get to the third box. If you're counting on how much you earned or deserve or have merited or are owed, you're dead in the water. When you stop counting, when you know it's all free gift, nothing did you deserve, then you can let it pass through you just as freely. But that's a notion of restorative justice. The word itself only appearing in the last 25 years. Unbelievable. So you see why I have to believe in evolutionary Christianity. It's clear to me the psyche, the soul, the collective is growing, is evolving. We can understand things that even 50 years ago we took for granted. Segregation, racism. And our grandparents even, well, that'd be great-grandparents, or great, still thought they could be Christian and own slaves. Sir, you do know that's kindergarten Christianity. In fact, no, it's not worth calling Christianity. And the states that most defended it, no offense to those of you from those states, are the states that most call themselves Christian. I'm not going to start naming names, but you know the ones I'm talking about. Christian, And it's so far from the gospel because these premises were never called into question. And it's not their fault. God loves them anyway. But the only difference is, brothers, salvation is not a question of if. It's a question of when. That's all. And you're the lucky ones who get to start living the abundant life now and can stop counting. These poor people who are trapped in counting. I gave you this much. You got to give me back that much. You'll never be happy. The fourth premise, that human worthiness is something we can attain, and this is what makes God move toward us. That prepares you for the winner's script. In fact, it's exactly the opposite. It's your poverty. It's your powerlessness. It's your weakness that both Francis and Therese said makes God come running toward you, like the filling up of a vacuum. When you call out to God out of your poverty, out of your emptiness, God cannot not respond. Who told me, who allowed me to waste 30 years in trying to prove myself by, well, I've obeyed the commandments this week, didn't masturbate, didn't think of naked ladies or naked anybody. That earns me your love. You say, don't go there. Don't get caught up in these useless, futile games, which have frankly made the largest percentage of men in the world just give up on the whole thing because they won't be hypocrites. They won't be phonies. Fifth and finally, and this might surprise you, maybe not, but the belief, and Protestants are even worse in this than we Catholics are, but we're bad enough, that God's work is primarily done with individuals. Again, I go back to the Hebrew Scriptures. All of God's relationship, covenant, love is with Israel, with the corporate, with the social, with the historical, with the people. God is saving history. Got it? That's my recent meditations have been about the cosmic Christ. We're all being saved in spite of ourselves. Got it? We're just caught up in the wake of God's outflowing and overpouring love, never giving up on this planet and who knows how many other planets. That's the good news. Now that would have created a very healthy culture. We would have lived in fear of God, fear of ourselves, and fear of one another. We don't enjoy that healthy culture. We don't enjoy that happy culture because we've whittled it down to how can you go to heaven, How can you go to heaven? How can you go to heaven? How can you go to heaven? How can Richard go to heaven apart from the rest of you? Huh? It's a losing script, and it's an unquestioned one, that it's all about individuals. I don't think it's about individuals at all. You are all being saved as a part of the whole. Christ is the Alpha and the Omega of history, and all of us are being saved by mercy, all of us by grace, all of us by the totally free love of God. And those of you who surrender to it now can start enjoying it now. It's that simple. And now, it doesn't mean that God doesn't love the other slobs who aren't enjoying it yet. They are slobs because they're not enjoying it. Do you understand? But don't hate them for it. No point in hating them for it. They just don't know. And you know. You know the gospel now. It's so big. It's so good. It's the only thing worth being called good news. Everything else is pretty much a different form of bad news. Really, a terrible form of bad news that will never save the world. Remember, Europe was the one continent we Catholics had in the bag until that damn Luther came along and divided it up, And then, of course, he largely imitated Catholicism and created a religion that was about singing songs to Jesus on Sunday mornings, Not about service to the world, not about being Jesus. Just let's endlessly talk about Jesus for 500 years, and argue about Jesus, who's got the true theology of Jesus, when the orphans and the widows were not being taken care of. When the heart that really would have been the heart of Jesus was not always evoked. So I think, to end, I think that's why, obviously, my hero, Pope Francis, had such an electric effect in his visit last month, that many people finally saw a clergyman that they could take seriously. And that he would be the highest one in our formulation was just mind-blowing to so many people. That someone so high could be so small and so little. And make sure in every city he was going to the jail and to the homeless shelters and not just prancing around in robes inside of Catholic churches. This was a new kind of Christianity for many people. Jim Wallace called me. I was talking to him that week from Sojourners in Washington. And he said, Richard, I've watched people come and go in Washington all my life. He says, no one has had the effect on everybody from left to right in a visit to this city as Pope Francis did. It was like a different kind of human being. But what I want to say here is a different kind of Christianity. And if we are supposed to be, as I hope we are, and you don't have to be Christian to get this, if we are supposed to be the leaven that's supposed to undo and redo the rest of society, I think that's the only path we have left. Not any argumentation about ideas or doing it right, but living in a different way that really makes people call their whole life into question, what it means and where it's going. So I thank you for letting me talk to you this honestly. I hope not too strongly, but I think that this would be my greatest hope, that Initiated Men is not another religious movement, but it's another life movement. That you're going to be a different kind of man out there. I don't really care what religious label you have. I don't. It means so little to me now. I see there's men who do it, and there's men who talk about it. And damn it, I've been one who's talked about it all my life. And I hope I don't get trapped there either. But I want you to be the men who do it, who live in a different way, a life that has to be called an abundant life, in touch with an abundant God, a larger-than-life God, not just a stingy God who's counting, a miserly God who's weighing, who's making a list, checking it twice, going to find out who's naughty or nice. That God is dead and should be dead and has nothing to do with the revelation of Jesus in the New Testament. So thank you, and thank you for your prayers for me in recent weeks. That's, I'm sure, the only reason I'm sitting here now. God bless you all. Thank you. Thank you.